Months had passed since Sarah left Ethan, and each day had been a step further away from the life they once shared. At first, the change had been unsettling. She wasn't used to being alone. The loneliness was loud in the beginning, echoing, in the empty corners of her home, in the space where his presence once filled the room. But as time went on, Sarah found a new rhythm, one that didn't revolve around someone else's needs or desires. The quiet was no longer a burden. It had become her space for growth, reflection, and healing. Yet despite all the progress she had made, there were still moments when Sarah thought of Ethan. The memories would surface unexpectedly, small things, like a song on the radio or a place they had visited together. She'd feel a wave of nostalgia, followed by a twinge of sadness, but it was different now. It was no longer a wound. It was a scar. The pain had dulled into something that didn't consume her anymore. She had moved on, but like all relationships, this one had left its mark. One autumn evening, Sarah was out running errands when she unexpectedly bumped into Ethan. The encounter took her by surprise. She had spent so much time pushing thoughts of him away, and now here he was, standing in front of her in the middle of the bustling street. He looked different, tired, maybe even a little thinner with deep circles under his eyes. The disheveled look didn't suit him, not the Ethan she remembered. He wasn't the man she had once loved. He was a shadow of the person he used to be. And for a brief moment, Sarah felt a flicker of sympathy. Ethan seemed equally taken aback. His eyes searched hers for a moment, like he was trying to read her, trying to gauge if she still cared. But Sarah wasn't sure what to say. The weight of the past hung between them, and the words she once would have said didn't seem to fit anymore. There was too much that had changed, too much water under the bridge. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Sarah, I didn't think I'd ever see you again," he said, his voice soft, almost uncertain. "I've tried to reach out. I thought maybe we could talk." Sarah took a deep breath, her heart still heavy with emotion. But she wasn't the same person who had left him. The woman who had walked away had changed. She wasn't here to relive the past, to beg for answers or explanations. She had learned that sometimes there were no answers. People did things, hurt others, and moved on. But that didn't mean she had to stay in the same place. "I know," Sarah replied, her voice calm but firm. "I saw your messages, but I couldn't reply. I needed to let go. I had to." Ethan's face fell slightly, but he didn't interrupt. He looked at her as if he were searching for something, perhaps a hint of the love she had once shown him, perhaps a sign that he could still fix what had been broken. But there was nothing. There was no spark of that connection anymore. It was gone, and it wasn't coming back. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly, almost as if he were talking to himself. "I messed up, Sarah. I know I didn't try hard enough when I should have. I know I was selfish. I didn't see what I had until it was too late." Sarah's heart twisted, but she wasn't going to fall back into the same old cycle of doubt and confusion. She had heard these words before. She had heard the apologies, the promises of change, and they had all fallen flat. This wasn't a conversation about forgiveness. It was a conversation about closure. I know you're sorry, Sarah said, her voice steady, not cold, but clear. But I can't keep living in the past, Ethan. I've spent too long wondering if I made the right choice, but I know now that I did. I had to leave for me. Ethan nodded slowly, his expression one of regret, but also of understanding. There was no anger in Sarah, no resentment. Just the quiet wisdom of someone who had been through enough to know when it was time to let go. I've changed too, Sarah continued, her voice softer now. I've learned a lot about myself. I realized I don't need anyone to complete me. I'm enough on my own. The words were simple, but they carried weight. They were a declaration of her growth, of her newfound strength. She had spent so long measuring her worth by someone else's love, but now she knew she was whole on her own. And that realization made all the difference. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her, his eyes full of something she couldn't quite place. Maybe regret, maybe admiration, maybe sorrow. I guess I've always been afraid of letting go, he said quietly. Afraid of being alone. Sarah smiled, a bittersweet smile. I used to be afraid of that too. But I've learned that sometimes being alone is the best thing you can do for yourself. It's when you find out who you really are. Ethan didn't reply. Instead, he took a step back, as if he were giving her the space she had fought so hard for. I guess I should let you go now, he said softly, and for the first time there was no pleading in his voice, just acceptance. Sarah nodded, her heart heavy, but her mind clear. Take care of yourself, Ethan. I hope you find what you're looking for. As she walked away, she didn't feel anger or sadness. She didn't feel the need for closure anymore. The meeting had been the closure. Ethan wasn't part of her life anymore, and she didn't need him to be. She was finally free from the past, from the relationship that had once defined her. In the quiet of the evening, Sarah realized something profound. She had walked away from the relationship not just to escape pain, but to reclaim herself. She had grown into someone stronger, more independent. The love she had for Ethan would always remain a part of her, but it no longer consumed her. She had found peace within herself, and in that peace, she knew that no matter what happened, she was enough. The courtroom was cold, not in temperature but in feeling. The walls were painted beige, the chairs arranged in sterile rows, and a clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. But Sophia didn't notice any of that. Her mind was loud, filled, with thoughts she couldn't silence. She sat alone at the plaintiff's table, clutching a folder with trembling hands. Inside were the final divorce papers. Her name, Sophia Wells, was printed neatly at the top. And across from her on the other side of that thin line dividing their seats was Ethan, her husband, or at least he had been until today. Ethan looked sharp as always, suit pressed, hair neatly styled, not a sign of emotion on his face. He looked like a man handling business, not one ending a decade-long marriage. Sophia watched him, her heart pulling tight. She remembered how much she used to love him, how they met at a summer festival, fell in love over shared books and rainy walks, how he proposed with shaking hands in a candlelit restaurant. Their love had once been the kind that made people envious. Now it lay in ruins. They didn't speak as the judge arrived. No eye contact. Just silence. The session was quick, routine. The judge asked questions, both parties answered. The gavel struck wood. Divorce granted. Just like that. Sophia signed the papers with a steady hand. No tears. She had cried in private, on bathroom floors and empty beds. Today, she wanted to leave with whatever dignity she had left. She stood, grabbed her coat, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. But outside, she wasn't prepared for what waited. As she stepped onto the courthouse steps, she was met with flashing lights, photographers, reporters, curious eyes. Her first thought was confusion, until she turned toward the noise. Just across the street, a grand hotel stood, draped in white and gold decorations. Music played softly from inside. Luxury cars were parked at the entrance. A wedding. And then, she saw them, Ethan, in a tuxedo, and Camille, in a flowing, shimmering white wedding dress, laughing, holding Ethan's arm, cameras capturing every moment. Sophia's heart dropped to her stomach. It wasn't just that he had moved on, it was today. Their divorce had just finalized, and he had already married Camille in the same breath. It felt like a slap. No, a betrayal deeper than she ever imagined. But even worse, this wasn't a surprise. She had known. Weeks ago, she had discovered Camille's name in Ethan's messages. She had found the reservations, the text confirmations, even the matching wedding bands delivered to their shared home, when he still lived there. She knew about the wedding. She knew about Camille, and more importantly, she knew something about Camille that Ethan didn't. She knew Camille was a fraud, but she said nothing. Today wasn't the day to expose it. Today was the day she let him go. Sophia stood there for a long moment. People brushed past her. Cameras zoomed in on the newlyweds. No one noticed the woman in a simple coat standing on the sidewalk, the woman who had just lost everything. She could have screamed, could have walked into that hotel and told everyone what Camille really was. Could have told Ethan that the woman he now called wife had a past full of shadows and secrets. But she didn't. Sophia adjusted her scarf and turned away. Each step felt heavy, but with each step, she gained something she hadn't felt in months: freedom. She walked away in silence, her head high, her heart quietly breaking, but her spirit intact, because she had the truth. And someday, that truth would come out, but not today. 6 months earlier, Sophia believed her marriage was going through a rough patch, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. After all, every couple had their ups and downs. She thought maybe Ethan was just stressed from work, maybe they needed a vacation, maybe they just needed time together. She never imagined he had already begun building a life with someone else. It started with little things: late nights at the office, fewer kisses goodbye, the way he avoided eye contact at dinner. Sophia felt it. That quiet distance that forms when love starts to slip away. She tried to talk to him, tried to make plans for weekend getaways or even simple date nights. But he was always too tired, too busy, too distracted. Still, she tried. She bought his favorite wine, made his favorite dinner, left notes in his briefcase like she used to. But each time her efforts were met with cold indifference, until one evening changed everything. Sophia had gone to surprise Ethan at his office, holding a small box of pastries from his favorite bakery and 2 coffees. It was past 9 p.m., and the building was mostly dark. She walked quietly through the hallway, heading to his office when she heard laughter. A woman's voice. She paused, hidden just outside the door. Then she heard Ethan's voice. Soft. Intimate. Nothing like the tone he used with her lately. A few moments later, she saw the woman step out. Tall, stylish, striking. She kissed Ethan on the cheek before walking away with a confident sway. Sophia's heart pounded, and her fingers grew cold around the coffee cups. She didn't confront him. Not then. She walked back down the hall, out of the building, and sat in her car in complete silence. The pastry sat untouched beside her. That night, something shifted in her. She could no longer pretend. But instead of breaking down, she became curious. Who was this woman? And what did she want? Sophia began searching. At first, she only had a name: Camille Harrington. A quick online search turned up very little. No social media, no official job title. It felt strange, almost too clean. Most people had at least some digital footprint, so she dug deeper. Through an old friend who worked at a private law firm, she gained access to public records. What she found sent a chill down her spine. Camille Harrington wasn't her real name. Her actual identity had changed 3 times in the last 7 years. Each time she moved to a new city, started a new life, and entered into a new relationship with someone wealthy. There was a man in Atlanta who reported being scammed out of $40,000 before Camille disappeared. Another in Chicago, who claimed she emptied his savings under the promise of starting a business together. In both cases, police investigations were opened, but dropped for lack of evidence or lack of cooperation from the victims. Camille left a trail of chaos, but no one had been able to stop her. Sophia's heart broke, not just because her husband had betrayed her, but because he was walking straight into a trap, and he refused to see it. When she tried to talk to him, Ethan accused her of being jealous and bitter. He dismissed every warning, every piece of evidence she gently offered. He believed Camille's story that Sophia was obsessed and unstable. Camille was good, dangerously good. Sophia stopped trying to convince him. If he couldn't see the truth now, he would see it later. But she wasn't going to let Camille hurt someone else without a trace. So she began documenting everything. Camille's history, the name changes, the past addresses. Sophia compiled it all in a private folder on her computer titled The Truth About Her. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity, about justice. But most of all, it was about closure. Sophia knew the day would come when everything would collapse. And when it did, she wanted to be ready, and until then, she would remain quiet. Because silence can be more powerful than 1,000 accusations. The moment Sophia stopped trying to fix things was the moment she began to rebuild herself. Quietly. Alone. Ethan had left only a week after she tried to show him who Camille really was. Not a discussion. Not a second thought. Just a cold, simple statement. I'm done living with your paranoia. He packed a suitcase, left the keys on the table, and walked out. No embrace, no apology. just silence, like their years together, had been erased. Sophia stood in the hallway long after the door closed. The air felt colder. The house that was once filled with laughter and soft jazz on Sunday mornings now echoed with a heavy stillness. At first, she tried to keep herself busy. She reorganized the kitchen, cleaned the garage, repainted a wall in the bedroom they once shared. But every corner held a memory, and every memory brought a question. How had it fallen apart so fast? How had Ethan gone from holding her hand during thunderstorms to holding another woman in secret? Her nights were the hardest. The silence became unbearable. She missed the weight of his presence beside her, even if the love had faded. She missed the smell of his cologne, the way he hummed while brushing his teeth, the warmth of knowing someone was near. But even deeper than that, she missed who she used to be, before the betrayal, before she doubted her worth. And while she tried to find peace, the world outside was moving on, without her. News of Ethan and Camille's relationship spread like wildfire among their social circle. Camille wasn't just charming, she was calculated. She knew how to win people, dinner parties, elegant photos, little gifts to win favor. She was everywhere Sophia once belonged. Sophia found herself slowly pushed out of her own life. Some friends ghosted her. Others quietly chose sides. Invitations stopped arriving. Calls stopped coming. She saw social media posts of gatherings where she used to be a central figure. Now Camille smiled in her place. But Sophia didn't fight it. Instead, she let herself feel the loss. She allowed herself to grieve, not just the end of a marriage, but the death of a life she had built with her bare hands. And in that space, something surprising happened. Strength started to grow. She went back to therapy, started journaling again, reconnected with her sister after years of silence. She even began attending yoga classes, where she met women with their own stories of heartbreak and healing. But behind her soft healing, she never stopped watching. From a distance, she kept collecting. Small pieces of Camille's past kept surfacing. Suspicious business registration in Miami, a restraining order filed under one of her old names, unpaid loans. Sophia's folder of truth kept growing. Then came the wedding announcement. Ethan and Camille had set a date. Sophia learned about it not from Ethan, but from a local magazine cover that featured Camille smiling in a white dress, holding Ethan's hand, with the headline, "Local Architect Weds Mysterious Beauty in Grand Affair." It was like the final punch to the gut. To the world, it was a love story. To Sophia, it was the final act of a well-played con. She debated sending everything she had to Ethan. She even drafted an email, attaching the documents, typing out one last plea. But her finger hovered over the send button, then slowly pulled away. What was the point of saving a man who didn't want to be saved? He had made his choice. Sophia closed the laptop and walked out into the cold night air. She stood under the stars, feeling the weight of the past, and exhaled. She hadn't just lost Ethan, she had lost herself. But now, she was finding her again, one piece at a time. The wedding day came faster than Sophia had expected. It was a crisp, cloudless morning. A golden sun shone gently through her bedroom window, touching the edge of her bed. Sophia had barely slept. Her dreams had been cluttered with memories, some sweet, some sharp. She stared at the ceiling, her chest still and heavy. This was it. Today she would sign the final divorce papers. Today she would legally and emotionally be free. But that same day, only a few blocks away, Ethan would be marrying her. Camille. Irony wasn't lost on her. Sophia got dressed in silence. She wore a simple gray coat and tied her hair back in a neat bun. No makeup, no jewelry. She didn't want to be noticed. She just wanted it to be over. The courthouse felt cold again, lifeless. She sat on the same bench she had sat on when they filed. The clerk handed her the final papers, and with one last glance, she signed her name and slid them back across the counter. It felt like pressing her own fingerprint into wet cement, permanent and final. Then she stepped outside, and that's when she heard the music. It was faint but carried on the wind. Violins, laughter, camera clicks, and applause. She followed the sound unconsciously. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was pain. But her feet moved on their own, taking her down the street, past the coffee shop they used to visit, past the bookstore where Ethan had bought her first edition poetry for their first anniversary. And then she saw it. The Grand Hotel. Draped in white fabric and golden ribbon. Luxury cars lined the sidewalk. Guests in elegant suits and glittering gowns poured in and out. Photographers swarmed the front entrance. At the center of it all stood Ethan. He looked exactly like he had on their wedding day, handsome, polished, proud. And beside him, smiling like a woman who had won the grand prize, stood Camille. Her dress was expensive, dramatic. Her hair done in soft waves. Her laugh floated through the air like a rehearsed melody. Sophia stood behind a nearby pillar, hidden. From view, her fingers curled tightly around her coat. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a performance. Every movement, every pose, every smile was calculated for the cameras. Camille was playing her part to perfection. The guests clapped, the media clicked, and the world saw a fairy tale. But only Sophia knew the truth. Camille was a liar, a con artist, a fraud, and Ethan? He was just another name on her growing list. Sophia had spent months collecting everything: documents, testimonies, screenshots, background reports. Camille had a history, 3 previous identities, men she had deceived, used, and discarded. A suspicious death of a former partner that had quietly disappeared under media pressure. Financial fraud. Misleading investments. It was all in the folder saved on her flash drive. She could have stopped this wedding. She could have stormed in, dropped the evidence on the altar, and exposed Camille in front of everyone. But she didn't. She just stood there, watching from the shadows, and then she turned. She walked away, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in silence. Because Sophia had realized something that day. Some victories don't come with applause. Some justice doesn't need to be loud. Let them celebrate their illusion. The truth would catch up. As she walked through the crowd unnoticed, someone bumped into her, a guest running late. The woman apologized quickly, not recognizing Sophia. It hit her then. She had become invisible in the world she once helped build, but in that invisibility, she found peace. No more pretending. No more defending herself. No more chasing love that didn't want to be caught. She stopped at a nearby bench and sat for a while, watching the world move. A child ran past chasing a balloon. A couple held hands, laughing. A busker played guitar. At the corner. Life was still happening, and Sophia was still breathing. The weight was slowly lifting. She whispered to herself, "You didn't lose. You let go." And that made all the difference. Weeks passed after the wedding, but Sophia didn't keep track. She had turned off notifications from mutual friends. She avoided social media. Her world had become smaller but calmer. Then, one afternoon, as she sipped tea in her garden, her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She let it ring. But then came a message. "Are you the ex-wife of Ethan Chambers?" Sophia hesitated. She replied, "Yes." "Who is this?" The message came quickly. "I need to talk to you. It's about Camille." Her heart skipped. Sophia called back. The voice on the other end was shaky. An older man named Gerald who introduced himself as Camille's former fiancé. He had been engaged to her 3 years earlier in Chicago. He explained how she'd charmed her way into his life, convinced him to open a joint account for a business venture, and disappeared one morning with everything. He had filed a report, but she was gone before the police could act. "I saw her in a magazine," Gerald said, "with your ex-husband. I thought he should know, but I couldn't reach him." Sophia listened silently. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just thanked him. More calls followed in the days after, from others Camille had deceived. Each story was eerily similar: charm, lies, disappearance. And now, Camille had finally hit the jackpot. Ethan, wealthy and well-connected. But the why? Cracks had started to show. A friend from Sophia's old circle sent her a message. "Are you seeing what's happening to Ethan's firm?" She hadn't been. But curiosity pulled her to look. Ethan's architecture firm had just announced a sudden halt in operations. A major investment had fallen through. Rumors of missing funds. Internal disagreements. Camille had apparently introduced Ethan to a startup pitch, a luxury interior design chain, and convinced him to invest heavily. The money was gone. And Camille? She was nowhere to be found for 3 days. Sophia sat at her desk, staring at her laptop. Her flash drive was still there, labeled Truth. She had waited for this, but now that it was happening, it felt hollow. Still, she acted. She composed a message to Ethan. It was short. Just one sentence and no attachments. "You're not the first." He didn't reply that day, or the next. But 3 nights later, at nearly 1 a.m., her phone rang. It was Ethan. She stared at the screen for a long time before answering. "Hello?" There was silence. Then a broken voice. "She's gone." Sophia said nothing. "She took everything, Sophia. The money. My name. My friends don't trust me. I lost the firm. My house. I didn't know." Sophia closed her eyes, leaning back in her chair. She heard the pain in his voice, the same pain she had once swallowed alone. And yet, a part of her still ached for him, despite everything. "She warned me about you," he continued. "Said you were jealous, obsessed, and I believed her." Sophia finally spoke, calm, measured. "I tried to tell you. You didn't want to hear it." There was silence again. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Ethan whispered. I don't know what to do." Sophia looked out her window, where the moonlight painted soft silver streaks on her garden. "You rebuild," she said softly. "Like I did." She ended the call. She didn't need to say more. The truth had done its job. She hadn't needed to shout it from rooftops. She just waited, patiently, quietly, and truth walked through the door like a storm. Sophia had lost so much. But in that moment, she realized she hadn't lost herself. She still had her peace, her strength, and the quiet power of dignity. And Ethan? He was only beginning to understand the cost of ignoring a quiet warning. Months passed. Winter rolled in quietly, frosting the windows and softening the noise of the outside world. Sophia had settled into her new life, not one of loud success or revenge, but of peace. She didn't think about Ethan much anymore, at least not every day. But then the headlines started. Wife of local architect arrested in major fraud investigation. Camille Chambers, fake identity, real crimes. $1 million scam exposed, victims speak out. Sophia sat at her kitchen table, tea cooling in her hands, staring at the news article on her laptop screen. It had finally happened. Camille had been arrested. Investigators had tracked her fraudulent investments, identity changes, and manipulation of multiple men across 3 states. Everything Sophia had documented, every scrap of research, every file, was now being validated by law enforcement. She hadn't turned it in herself. She didn't need to. She had anonymously mailed the flash drive to the Financial Crimes Unit 5 weeks ago, marked with one word, urgent. That was enough. Truth doesn't need a name to stand behind it. It just needs to be shown. Ethan's face appeared in the article too. Pale, drawn, and deeply aged by what he had gone through. He wasn't accused of any crime, but his reputation was in shambles. His name had been linked to Camille's scams. His firm was gone. His house sold. His phone number changed. His silence in public only fueled the speculation. One afternoon, Sophia returned home to find a small envelope tucked into her mailbox. Inside was a handwritten letter. "I don't know where to begin, but thank you. I was blind, and I chose to stay blind. You tried to warn me, and I hurt you instead. I destroyed something precious. And for what? An illusion. I don't expect you to care anymore, but I wanted you to know. I see everything now. I see you. I'm sorry. Ethan." She folded the letter neatly and placed it inside a journal she had started months ago. Not to hold on to the pain, but to mark the end of it. Later that week, she met an old friend for coffee, someone who had once drifted away during the scandal, choosing silence instead of support. The friend looked at her with genuine remorse. "I'm sorry for not believing you," she said. "We all thought you were bitter, but you were right." Sophia smiled gently. "It's okay. Sometimes truth takes time." They sipped coffee quietly after that. No need to rehash the past. It was done. Sophia's life began to blossom in unexpected ways. She started volunteering at a local women's center, sharing her story not as gossip, but as guidance. Women came to her with stories of betrayal, confusion, manipulation. And she listened, truly listened. For the first time in a long while, she felt like her voice mattered again. She also started writing. A blog at first, where she poured her emotions out anonymously. Soon it gained followers, other women who had been silenced, dismissed, and gaslit. Her words, her quiet strength, gave others the courage to speak. And one day, as spring peaked, in with its promise of renewal, she met someone new. He wasn't flashy or overly charming, just kind, attentive. He listened when she spoke and laughed with his whole face. They met through her book club, exchanged stories about childhood summers, and slowly, carefully, began building a connection, not on excitement, but on peace. She told him about her past, about Ethan, about Camille, and he didn't flinch. Instead, he said, "That just means you know how to recognize real love now." On the anniversary of her divorce, Sophia visited the courthouse again, not for papers, not for closure, just to stand there and remind herself how far she had come. She had walked out once with her heart shattered, while behind her a grand wedding had stolen all the attention. But now, no one saw her leave the steps again. No cameras, no whispers, and yet this time she smiled. Because the truth had spoken, justice had moved, and she, without noise, without anger, had survived it all. In silence, she had known, and in silence, she had won.